They say that the waters of the Brazos River keep more stories than any book ever written about Texas. Running winding through the heart of the state, witnessed centuries of blood, promises and betrayals. But what few know is that, at certain nights, when the moon hides and the storm shakes its depths, the river speaks. Ancient words emerge from the currents, secrets that should remain submerged. In 1842, 6 years after Texas's independence, Sam Houston, strategist, general and founding father of the Republic, found these voices for 3 fateful nights that forever altered the course of his life and, perhaps, Texas himself. This is the story that was never told, how the great American hero confronted the ghosts that inhabited not only the tumultuous waters of the Brazos, but also the darkest nooks of his own soul. The sources of this extraordinary account remained hidden for generations, carefully preserved by descendants of both settlers and natives. Letters never published, sealed diaries, confessions in deathbeds. Pieces of a puzzle that reveals a Sam Houston that history books fear show fragile, tormented, and forced to face truths that threaten to destroy the mythology of a newborn nation. What happens when a country's architect is confronted by the voices of those who were silenced to build it? What arises when the waters reveal secrets that the earth tried to bury? The whispers of the Brazos River. Sam Houston's personal diary, May 1842. I hesitate to record the events of the last 3 nights. Even now, sitting safely on the porch of my house in Raven Hill, with Margaret sleeping quietly in the bedroom and the morning sun pushing the shadows, my hand shakes the sentence. The roll seems to reject words, as if nature itself resisted the revelation of certain secrets. But I should document what happened. If not for me, then for my sanity, and perhaps for the acquittal I seek so much, even if it never really deserves it. It all started 4 days ago, when I decided to board a brief expedition through the Brazos River. State matters had become suffocating, and frequent disputes with the Congress of the Republic about our policies with Mexico and the native tribes were running out my spirit. Margaret noticed my dark humor and suggested that I retreat to the loneliness that always brought renewal to my soul. At first I planned a simple 3-day journey, climbing the river to the old abandoned commercial post in Fort Millam and returning. I took just what I needed, my Cherokee canoe, gift from my days living between them as Kalana, the Crow, basic provisions, my rifle, a bottle of whiskey, and this diary. I wanted to fish, hunt, perhaps visit some of the old settlements I helped found years ago. A banal trip, one that I did countless times before. The first day passed without incidents. The sky was clear, the calm waters. Constantly remedy for about 20 miles, stopping only for a simple lunch of dried meat and bread. At dusk, I ended up in a small rise on the east margin, made a bonfire, fisted a robust cattle for dinner, and fell asleep under the stars. It was, in every respect, a quiet journey. The next morning the sky dawned differently. Heavy clouds accumulated in the west in an unusual pattern for the season. Any prudent man would have returned, but the idea of facing the problems I left behind seemed scarier than any storm. I decided to continue, hoping to reach the strong Millam before the storm hit me. Around noon, the wind began to howl among the trees that bordered the river, and the sky darkened as if the twilight had arrived prematurely. The first thunder roars distant, but approaching rapidly. I increased the rhythm of the paddles, seeking an appropriate shelter. That was when I noticed an opening on the west bank, a small cove protected by a rocky outcrop. I drove the canoe there urgently, as the first raindrops already struck the surface of the river as small projectiles. I had barely tied my boat on an exposed route when the heavens opened in fury. I have never witnessed so intense rain. It was as if Rio himself had reversed his course and now falling from the sky. I grabbed my supplies and housed myself under a rocky protrusion that formed a kind of shallow cave. From there, I observed the transformation of the Brazos. In minutes, its normally reddish-brown waters became black and violent, rising rapidly and devouring the banks. The rain was so dense that it could barely see beyond 10 steps. The roar of the storm drowned out all the other sounds, except the occasional stamp of thunder that seemed to tear the fabric itself from the sky. As the day darkened for a premature night, I realized that I was effectively arrested. The now indomitable river made any attempt at navigation impossible. The current carried trunks and wreckage hard enough to smash my canoe in a moment. My only option was to expect the storm to pass. I used what I could find: fallen branches, pieces of floating wood that I reached the margin, to build a small fire under the protection of the rock. The fire fought against penetrating moisture, but I managed to keep it alive enough to warm my trembling hands and illuminate my improvised shelter. It was that first night, while the hours dragged on and the storm kept their relentless fury, that I began to hear the voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind howling through the rocky trees and cavities, creating those ghostly sounds that any border man knows well. Or maybe the murmur of running water, distorted by the peculiar acoustics of my shelter. But gradually, it became undeniable. There were distinct words emerging from the roar of the river. Fragments initially incomprehensible that slowly gained clarity, as if those who spoke were learning to manifest their voices after a long silence. "Houston," the water whispered. "Houston, you came." I attributed this to fatigue, isolation, perhaps the small sip of whiskey I took to ward off the cold. For anything except what it really seemed to be voices emerging from the depths of the enraged river. "We knew you would come. We were waiting." I closed my eyes, pressed my hands against my ears, recreated silently excerpts from the Bible that my mother had taught me in her childhood. But the voices persisted, now clearer than thunder itself. "Remember us, Kalani? Remember what you promised?" The use of my name Cherokee left me paralyzed. Few in Texas knew this part of my past, the years I lived among the Cherokee after leaving my first wife and renouncing the Tennessee government. Years I passed as a man adopted by another nation, learning his forms, his secrets, his pain. Promised to protect, promised justice. "Where's your word now, great boss?" The voices did not come from a single source. It was a choir, men, women, even the acute timbre of children blended in the aquatic cacophony. Some spoke in English, others in Spanish, many in the many native dialects I recognized from my borders: Cherokee, Comanche, Caddo, Karankawa. "You cheated on us, all of you betrayed." It was then that a pale form emerging from the turbulent water. The silhouette of a native woman, long black hair floating around her face like aquatic snakes. His eyes had no iris, just a milky void that somehow still seemed to see me painfully. I jumped back, almost falling into the fire. My hand instinctively sought the rifle, but something stopped me from lifting it. Perhaps the recognition that no bullet could hurt what was before me, or perhaps the deep shame your words aroused. "Do you remember me, Kalani?" The voice was kind now, almost tender, contrasting with the violence of the storm. "I am a Tailtse, daughter of Ameavui, the boss who called him a son. I died in the year of great removal when his white people kicked us out of our lands in the east. I remembered her then, a young Cherokee I met during my years between the tribe. She had been kind to me, teaching my tongue, the traditions. There were rumors among some warriors that she nourished feelings for me, although I never encouraged such affections. You promised you would protect us when you returned to the white world," continued the appearance. "He said he would never allow us to be treated unfairly. And where was it when the soldiers burned our homes? Where were when our children starved on the track of tears?" His words hit me as physical blows. It was true that I had made such promises to the Cherokee who welcomed me. And it was equally true that once returned to politics, other priorities, Texas independence, our survival as a nation, had obscured those oaths. I tried, I muttered, barely recognizing my own voice. I fought for just treaties. I opposed the most severe policies. "Words," said his face expressing a deep sadness. "Empty words as our blood fertilizes their lands." Before she could answer, she submerged again. But where his face was, another emerged, a young Mexican soldier with a black hole where his right eye should be. "General Houston," he said in Spanish clear. "Do you remember San Jacinto? Remember Alamo?" I recognized the uniform, one of the men of Santa Anna that we had defeated in 1836, ensuring Texas's independence. "We beg for mercy," the soldier continued. "Let us depuse our weapons. And yet your men shot us like animals, shouting for revenge. Is that what you called honor? The massacre after our victory in San Jacinto was a stain that I had tried to forget. In the wave of the battle, many of our men, enraged by the atrocities committed in Alamo and Goliad, had executed unarmed Mexican prisoners. I tried to stop the bloodshed, but my voice was lost in the frenzy of victory. You didn't stop it, accused the soldier. You could have stopped the massacre, but let it happen. My blood is also in your hands. Before he could defend myself, his face dissolved in the turbulent waters, only to be replaced by another, and another, and another, and seemingly endless procession of faces emerging from the river. Settlers massacred by natives. Natives exterminated by settlers. Mexicans, Americans, fugitive slaves, adventurous broken by the hardness of the border. Each had its own story. Each carried an accusation. Each linked his tragic destiny to my actions or inactions as a leader. You built a country about our bones, they said in unison. You wrote history with our blood. I don't know how long it lasted, that macabre procession. Hours, maybe. The stone remained unshakable, as if heaven himself was feeding that supernatural meeting. At some point, exhausted beyond understanding, I succumbed to uneasy sleep, haunted by nightmares that were only extensions of the visions that tormented me awake. When I woke up the next morning, the storm had diminished for a constant but still heavy rain. The river remained swollen and furious, making navigation impossible. I looked into the waters with apprehension, fearing to see those accusing faces again, but in the gray light of the day, the Brazos looked just a river, powerful and dangerous but natural. I spent the day fortifying my shelter, gathering more wood, drying my soaked clothes when possible. I tried to rationalize the events of the night before: exhaustion, perhaps delirium caused by some plant or fungus that inadvertently ingested. Any explanation seemed preferable to the truth that the dead had broken the veil to confront their accusations. But with the nightfall, when the shadows stretched and the rain again intensified, the voices returned. This time, they were not strangers who emerged from the waters, but faces I knew intimately. My father, the largest Samuel Houston, killed when I was only 14, looked at me with disappointment. You have dishonored our name, he said, using it to justify cruelty and ambition. Then, my first wife, Eliza Allen, from whom I ran away after just 3 months from a disastrous marriage, abandoning not only her but my position as governor of Tennessee. You ran away, she accused. Always running away when the consequences of their actions reach him. Then President Andrew Jackson, my mentor and political patron, still alive at the time, but appearing as spectral as the others. I turned you into a statesman, lamented. And you have just become another border tyrant. The night extended into an endless procession of personified guilt. Every failed relationship, every betrayed covenant, each broken promise appeared to demand recognition. The river seemed to amplify and materialize all the remorse I had buried under years of patriotic rhetoric and political justifications. On the third night, the storm reached its peak. The rain no longer fell, it was a solid water curtain. The river had risen so much that it almost reached my shelter, forcing me to retreat to the highest ground. The thunder was constant, an uninterrupted bombardment that made the land itself shake. It was then that the most terrible of appearances emerged from water, not an individual, but a collective mass of fluid forms that gradually assumed the outline of a huge map of Texas. Each river, each mountain, each border formed by intertwined bodies, native, Mexicans, settlers, all united in a macabre geography of flesh and spirit. And then the map spoke, not in a voice, but with thousands, united in a disturbing harmony. See what he built, Sam Houston. A nation founded not on the freedom he proclaims, but in the lies that tells herself. Each acre watered with denied blood. Each city raised about broken promises. You're not a hero. You are just the most skilled of thieves. Something inside me broke out then. The facade of the statesman, the victorious general, the father of the Republic of Texas, collapsed as a dam yielding to unbearable pressure. What do you want from me? I shouted against the storm, tears by mixing the rain on my face. I can't undo the past. We don't want to undo, answered the chorus of voices. We want true. We want recognition. We want Texas to know the real price of its birth. What if I do that? If you tell the truth? So some of us can finally rest, it was the answer. And you can face your own judgment with less weight in your soul. I fell to my knees in the mud, defeated not by armies, but for the truth that I avoided so long. I'll tell you, I promised. I will put everything in records that cannot be ignored. A bitter laugh emanated from the river. You will try. But your Texas is not ready for such truths. Your words will be hidden, denied, forgotten. Still, you should try. It's the only acquittal we offer you. With these words, the live map of Texas dissolved in separate swirls that gradually disappeared in the now almost quiet waters. The storm, as if fulfilled its purpose, began to decrease. The clouds dispersed, revealing a starry heaven for the first time in 3 nights. Exhausted beyond understanding, I fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the sun shone, the river had returned to its normal level, and nothing but the dry mud on my clothes showed the supernatural storm that had trapped me. I gathered my belongings, put the canoe back in the now peaceful water, and started my return journey. No longer an escape of responsibility, but a race toward her. Now, sitting on my balcony writing these words, I know what I should do. In my remaining years, I will document not only the glory of the Texan Revolution, but also its shadows. Not only our triumphs, but our sins. Not the convenient mythology we build, but the complex and often shameful truth. I know I will face resistance. I know I will risk my reputation, maybe even my position. But the voices of the Brazos River will not leave me alone until it fulfills my promise. Texas was built by both tears and courage, both by betrayal and nobility. Both stories deserve to be told, and I, who helped forge this state by virtue and sin, must be the one to tell. May God have mercy on my soul. Samuel Houston Ravenhill, Texas, May 14, 1842. The Legacy of the Whisper. From the Personal Archive of Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, University of Texas, 2019. The manuscript above, known as the Brazos River Diary, remained hidden for more than 150 years before being discovered in 1996 during the renewal of Sam Houston's last residence in Huntsville. Found within a sealed cavity on the office wall, along with several other personal documents, the diary offers a disturbing view of the psychological state of one of Texas's most venerated founders. Most traditional historians discard the manuscript as a work of fiction, perhaps a literary exercise or a moral parable that Houston never intended to publish. They point to minor historical inconsistencies and the melodramatic tone as evidence that the text should not be interpreted literally. However, there are disturbing elements that resist easy explanations. Meteorological records confirm that an abnormally severe and prolonged storm in fact reached the Brazos River region in May 1842, during the period when Houston allegedly performed its solitary expedition. Official correspondence shows an inexplicated 4-day interval in his communications, something rare for a man known for his administrative diligence. More intriguing is the noticeable change in Houston's politics regarding indigenous and Mexican issues after May 1842. In the following years, he adopted progressively more conciliatory positions, often over his own popularity. His speeches began to include veiled references to the true costs of Texan independence and the need for historical honesty, phrases that echo the alleged promises made to river appearances. Particularly notable was his vehement opposition to the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, which many of his contemporaries saw as a betrayal to Texan expansionism that he himself had helped to foster. When asked about this apparent contradiction during a heated U.S. Senate debate, Houston replied enigmatically, "There are voices beyond those who scream for more land and more glory, voices that I have ignored too long." During my research on the manuscript, I discovered private correspondence between Houston and Cherokee tribal leaders who survived forced removal, in which he expresses remorse in terms that seem directly influenced by the experience described in the diary. In a letter particularly revealing to John Ross, chief of the Cherokee Nation, Houston wrote, "The river showed me truths that I can no longer deny, friend. The waters keep memories that the earth tries to forget, and now these memories haunt me in the most silent hours. I fear it is too late to correct many of the mistakes made, but I cannot and will not remain silent about them. Which leads me to seriously consider the authenticity of the manuscript. However, it is not just these historical correlations, but my own investigative experiences in the region. Over the past 3 years, I have conducted extensive field research along the Brazos River, interviewing descendants of original settlers, local tribes, and other long-time residents. A disturbing pattern emerged from these reports: stories of voices in the river during severe storms, particularly in the specific stretch where Houston was arrested. Fishermen, camper, and local residents describe remarkably similar experiences: the sudden silence of wildlife, followed by whispers emerging from the waters, often in tongues that listeners do not understand but who feel deeply. Even more significant is the phenomenon reported by identifiable descendants of the victims mentioned in the diary: Cherokee forcibly removed, survivors of the Goliad massacre, families of Mexican soldiers killed in San Jacinto. Many describe recurring dreams in which an ancestor emerges from the Brazilian waters to tell his true story, not the one recorded in Texas's history books. As a historian committed to rigorous academic methodologies, he is in proposing definitive conclusions about the supernatural nature of the events described in the diary. However, the consistency of contemporary accounts, combined with Houston's rhetorical and policy changes after May 1842, strongly suggests that something deeply transformative occurred during that storm on the Brazos River. Perhaps the most revealing is the fact that, despite his apparent intentions to reveal the complete truth, Houston has never published a comprehensive report of the injustices he helped perpetrate. His most controversial writings remain sealed in his residence, discovered only a century and a half after his death. As the voices of the river predicted, your Texas is not ready for such truths. Your words will be hidden, denied, forgotten. It seems that even now, prophecy is fulfilled. My efforts to publish academic analyses of the Rio Brazos diary faced constant resistance from Texan institutions. Financing were revoked, submissions to rejected journals, canceled lectures. The mythology around Sam Houston and the birth of Texas proved notably resilient, resisting revisions that can complicate established heroic narratives. However, the voices continue. Not just those documented in the diary, but the voices of all whose stories were marginalized at the Texan grand narrative: Native Americans, Mexican Llanos whose citizenship was committed, slaves whose freedom was postponed, women whose contributions were minimized. As Houston apparently discovered in those 3 nights of storm, the Brazos River does not forget. And perhaps, finally, we are approaching a time when Texas is ready to hear what the waters have to say. One night in Rio. Personal report of Carlos Vasquez, independent historian, 2022. I am not superstitious by nature. As a historian specializing in the Texas Republic era, I base my analyses on documents, correspondence, official records, tangible evidence that can be verified and corroborated. When I heard about Sam Houston's Rio Brazos diary for the first time, I discarded it as a historical curiosity, possibly a forgery, at most an elaborate allegory created by Houston himself. It was this skeptical conviction that led me to Rio in April 2022, determined to deny what he considered a growing mysticism around the manuscript. I planned a soloist expedition following Houston's alleged script, equipped with modern technology, GPS, waterproof camping equipment, satellite phone, and a healthy dose of academic disdain. The project was simple: to retract the journey described in the diary, document any geographical or practical inconsistency that could undermine its authenticity, and produce a definitive article discrediting the most sensational interpretations of the text. I was particularly interested in locating the specific rock formation where Houston allegedly took shelter, a milestone that, if it could not be found, would significantly weaken the credibility of the account. The first 2 days passed without incidents. The modern Brazos is, in many parts, unrecognizable compared to the wild river of the 19th century. Dams, bridges, urban and agricultural development have transformed their margins. Still, using historical maps and the diary itself as a guide, I was able to identify various reference points mentioned by Houston. On the afternoon of the third day, I located what seemed to be the cove described in the manuscript, a small curve protected by a rocky outcrop that partially projected over the river, forming a natural shelter. I confess that I felt an involuntary chill in confirming the existence of this specific milestone, but quickly attributed it to the satisfaction of a historian by verifying a factual detail. I ended up there, determined to spend the night at the same place where Houston would have experienced his supposed supernatural meetings. The sky was clear, with no sign of the apocalyptic storm described in the diary. I set up my tent, prepared a simple meal on my portable stove, and spent a few hours cataloging observations on my laptop before falling asleep. I was awakened around 2 in the morning by the sound of the rain. Not a storm, just a moderate, constant rain that had not been foreseen by meteorology. I found that my tent was safe and was about to go back to sleep when I noticed something strange: the complete silence of wildlife. Anyone who has already camped near a Texan river knows the constant night symphony: crickets, frogs, night birds, the occasional howl of distant coyotes. Now, besides the drum from the rain, nothing. An absolute and unnatural silence that made the hair on my neck erect. I convinced myself that it was just a meteorological anomaly, perhaps a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure temporarily silenced the local fauna. I tried to go back to sleep, but the silence was almost deafening in its intensity. That's when I heard the first whisper. So low that I initially thought it is just the wind in the trees or water running over stones. But gradually, it became unmistakable, a human voice, apparently emanating from the river itself. "Historian," whispered. "Came to look for the truth." I got up abruptly, flashlight in hand, sweeping beams of light through the wet darkness. Nothing but the constant rain, the trees hecticized by the wind, and the river running faster now with the additional influx of water. "It's here because you doubt." The voice continued, now distinctly feminine, with a slight accent that I couldn't identify precisely. Native, perhaps, but with Spanish inflections. "Because you believe only what you can play, what you can measure." I left the tent completely, exposing myself to the rain, spinning in a circle with the flashlight. "Who is there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice firm. A soft laugh responded, not a single laugh, but several overlapping, as if a group of people were sharing a particular joke at my expense. "No one is here," answered the voice, now deeper, male. "Only those who have always been. Those that the river remembers." I came carefully approached the bank. The water had risen considerably since I lay down, advancing several meters over what was once dry land. Surface ripples seemed to form patterns that almost, but not completely, resembled human features. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, although I knew I was completely alone in that isolated stretch of the river. "A trick elaborated to scare the skeptical historian?" "No need to believe," replied the river, now with a childish voice that sent goosebumps through my spine. He didn't believe it either. At first, I immediately realized that he referred to Houston. An involuntary tremor crossed my body that had nothing to do with the cold rain. "What do you want?" I asked, feeling ridiculous for speaking to a river, but unable to ignore what I was hearing. "We want the same one we wanted him," answered the chorus of voices, now speaking in unison. "Recognition. Truth. Justice." The water in front of me began to stir, and something emerged, not a full face or shape, but an approximation, as if the river itself was trying to sculpt human features from its fluid substance. The result was an aquatic mask that vaguely resembled Native American features. "He promised to tell," he continued, his voice, now emanating directly from that liquid face. "He promised to reveal the bodies that built his Texas. The sacrifices that no one wanted to remember. But the world was not ready. And perhaps it is not yet." Despite my skepticism, I felt a knot in my throat. As a historian, he had devoted my career to discovering complex truths behind simplified narratives. How many voices had been silenced in the reports I studied? How many stories remained submerged, while more convenient versions floated on the surface of historical consciousness? What happened to Houston here? I asked finally. The aquatic face smiled, a disturbing wire that seemed to extend beyond the natural limits of a human face. He wondered the truth. He saw the true cost of his glory. The ghosts his legacy carried. And that changed it, I whispered, more to myself than to the river. He tried. He documented everything. But he knew Texas would not accept. Then he sealed the words on walls, waiting for a day when the living were ready to hear the dead. As the entity spoke, the water around the face began to stir again, but differently. Additional forms emerged, dozens, then hundreds of tiny faces forming on the surface of the river, each distinct, each apparently representing a different life. "These are the forgotten," said the main face. "The deleted ones. Those who bleed in the foundations of their world." The smaller faces began to murmur simultaneously, creating an indistinct but intensely emotional cacophony. He could not discern individual words, but felt the underlying feeling: loss, betrayal, anger, a demand for recognition. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my almost inaudible voice under the growing choir. "Do what he couldn't end," answered his face, his voice now overlapping all the others. "Tell the full story. Not just glory, but the cost. Not just the winners, but the sacrificed." The rain was suddenly intensified, falling into dense curtains that obscured my vision. The faces in the water began to dissolve, returning to the chaotic standard of waves and chains. "Wait!" I shouted against the growing storm. "How can I prove that this is real? How can I make someone believe?" One last voice emerged from the water, so low that I had to tilt to hear. "In the third drawer of Houston's desk in Huntsville, there is a fake panel. Behind him, another diary. The true legacy. Find him." And then silence. Just the rain, the river, and a soaked historian trying to sue what he had witnessed. I spent the rest of the night in the vigil, hoping the voices would return, but listening only to the natural sounds of the gradually diminished storm. When dawn finally arrived, it brought with it clear heavens and the certainty that my understanding of the past and my own field had been hopelessly altered. I dismantled camp quickly and started my return journey, possessed by an urgency that could not completely explain. 3 days later, I was able to obtain special permission to examine Houston's original desk preserved on his last home in Huntsville, now a state museum. The information provided by the voice was accurate. There was a hidden compartment, ignored by generations of historians and curators. And inside it, an additional diary, much more detailed than the already known Brazos River diary. His pages contain not only the report of the Houston meeting with the voices of Rio, but years of meticulous documentation: names, dates, events, specific injustices that he witnessed or in which he participated during the formation of Texas. The implications of this document are too huge to summarize here. My full book, The Whispering of Rio, Sam Houston and Texas Forgotten Voices, will be published next year by the University of Texas Press, an irony that is still impressing me, considering how long the institution has resisted the narratives that complicate state mythology. As for my own experience that rainy night, I don't offer definitive explanations. Perhaps it was suggestion, fed by my immersion in the original manuscript. Perhaps some natural acoustic phenomenon peculiar to that stretch of the river. Or perhaps, as Sam Houston apparently discovered 180 years earlier, the Brazos River really keeps deeper memories than any book of history can ever contain. One thing is certain: I will never look at a river the same way. And the deeper dive into the submerged layers of Texan history, the more I begin to understand what the voices wanted to say. Some truths remain drowned not because they cannot be recovered, but because we prefer the version of the story that floats comfortably on the surface. But just as water always finds a way to follow its course, also the truth eventually finds its way through the barriers we build to contain it. And the river never forgets. If this story has aroused its curiosity about the hidden secrets of American history, be sure to subscribe to the channel to receive more disturbing reports about the dark side of our country's formation. Each week we explore the stories that conventional books do not tell, the voices that were silenced, and the supernatural events that may have shaped our collective past. Leave in the comments what other historical figures you would like to see in our next stories, and what dark secrets may be hidden in your official biographies. Remember to activate notifications so as not to lose any video, and share it with friends who enjoy when history and mystery intertwine on the dark margins of reality. Because, as Sam Houston discovered in the turbulent waters of the Brazos River, sometimes the truest stories are those we try most hard to forget.